I have been a resonance adept for 51 years. I want that stated clearly at the beginning of this log, because what follows will seem like the account of someone who panicked. I did not panic. I am setting this down in order, from first contact to last, with the same discipline I have applied to every scan record I have filed in 5 decades of service to the Vael Sovereignty. If my hands are not steady at the console, it is not because I have lost my composure. It is because I no longer have a console. I am speaking this into the emergency buffer because the primary log station is open to space, and the secondary is slag, and the tertiary was in the scan adept bay, which ceased to exist 11 minutes and 42 seconds ago along with everyone inside it. My name is Theth Oranseva. I hold the rank of Senior Resonance Adept, First Class, Korveth Station, Vael Sovereignty Deep Approach Watch. I have run more scans than any living adept in the Sovereignty's recorded history. I have scanned nebulae that would blind a lesser instrument. I have scanned dead stars so dense the resonance return took 3 standard days to untangle. I have scanned derelict haulers, decommissioned battle platforms, collapsed stargates, and once, in the early years of my career, before the silence accords, a live Tivari war cluster at a range of 40,000 standard units, close enough that I could read individual crew compartments. Nothing in 51 years prepared me for what the contact at grid position, Korveth 7 deep, looked like on the scan return. I want to describe it accurately, because accuracy is the only tribute I have left to offer. There will be other records, if this log reaches anyone, records from the station's automated systems, from whatever fragments of the fleet's tactical network survived, from anything that was passively recording in the approach corridor during the 11 minutes of the engagement. Those records will contain data. This log contains the sequence as I experienced it, the decisions as I made them, the reasoning as I applied it. I want the reasoning preserved, because the reasoning was sound by every standard I have been trained to apply, and it was still wrong, and I think the gap between those two things is the most important thing this log can convey. The first ping was routine. We log hundreds of anomalous contacts every day along the Korveth approach. Most are ice bodies. Some are wreckage from the consolidation wars. A few are unregistered traders trying to slip through the deep approach corridor without paying sovereignty transit tariffs. The resonance signature of an ice body has a characteristic scatter diffusion pattern, flat, broad, no internal coherence. A trader runs light and cold, with the compressed thermal signature of life support and drive systems showing up as a cluster of warm nodes inside a larger cool mass. Wreckage is the easiest read of all. Incoherent, random, no organized reflectivity. I can tell the difference between categories at a glance after 51 years. The contact at Korveth 7 deep was none of those things. At first pass, a low-intensity survey ping, the kind we run automatically on anything larger than 30 meters, the return was simply absent, not scattered, not diffused, absent. The ping went in and did not come back at all. I noted it in the log as a null return anomaly and flagged it for follow-up. A null return can indicate a resonance-absorbing body. Certain alloys and composite materials will eat a low-intensity scan without reflecting anything readable. But in 51 years, I had only seen genuine null returns on 2 occasions, both of them Sovereignty deep-hull research vessels coated in experimental absorption plating. This was not one of ours. I had checked the transit manifest before I even finished the first flag notation. Nothing scheduled for Korveth 7 deep. Nothing scheduled for the Korveth approach at all. In fact, beyond a routine supply convoy not due for another 6 days. So I increased intensity to medium survey and ran it again. Before I describe what came back, I want to describe what scanning feels like for a reader who may not be an adept. It is not passive. It is not like looking through a window. You do not sit and receive information. You reach out with the emitters and you touch the target, and the target touches you back. And in the conversation between the outgoing wave and the returning echo, there is a kind of intimacy. After 51 years, I feel a scan return the way a musician hears an instrument, not just the note, but the quality of the note, the overtone, the decay. I know when something is wrong with a return before my analysis systems flag it. The analysis systems are faster, but I am older, and in the 51 years I have been doing this, the analysis systems have been wrong 12 times. I have not been wrong once. The medium survey returned from the contact at Korveth 7 Deep was wrong in a way I felt before I read. The delay between the ping and the return was off by a fraction, not the kind of fraction that would alarm a newer adept, but the kind that 51 years teaches you to notice the way a sailor notices a change in the wind smell. A standard medium survey at that range should return in 0.42 standard seconds. This one came back in 0.49. 7/100ths of a second. That is not a rounding error. That is a hull eating part of your signal and giving back only what it chooses to give back. What it gave back suggested a mass in the range of 400,000 standard mass units, elongated profile, low thermal output. 400,000 mass units. I will be precise about what that means, because the number is important. The largest ship class in the Vael Sovereignty's current active fleet is the hegemony carrier Tevrath class, which masses at 260,000 standard units fully laden. The largest single structure the Sovereignty has ever built, including the gate stations at the consolidation perimeter, masses at 310,000 units. Whatever was sitting at Korveth 7 Deep massed more than any of those. And it was running cold. Its thermal output was so low that if I had not already been looking at it, I would have dismissed the reading as a warm ice body. A hull that massive, running that cold. I flagged the contact as priority amber and woke Commander Korveth Station, who runs the overnight watch. I did not have to argue with her. She looked at the preliminary data, looked at me across the width of the operations floor and said, "What is it?" "I don't know," I said. In 51 years, I had never said those words in an operational context. Korveth Station has known me for 11 of them. She recognized what it meant. Within 20 minutes, Korveth Station was at full alert. The alert brought 31 additional adepts and support staff to the operations floor, and I briefed them in 2 minutes while Scan 4 was running. Here is a contact. Here is the mass reading. Here is why we do not know what it is. I assigned 4 of my senior adepts to independent scan analysis, meaning they would run their own returns in parallel with mine, and we would compare readings. In 51 years, I had ordered independent parallel analysis on 6 previous occasions. Each time, the parallel analysis had confirmed my own readings. Each time, I had hoped it would not. I had hoped that one of my adepts would find an error in my methodology, a calibration fault, something that explained the anomaly as a technical artifact rather than a genuine unknown. Each time, the confirmation had been the more unsettling result. On this occasion, my 4 senior adepts confirmed every anomalous reading within 18 minutes. There was no calibration fault. There was no technical artifact. The contact was real, it was enormous, and none of us had a category for it. Within 40 minutes of the initial contact, Admiral Cheth Borenves had been woken on the command deck of the Sovereignty battle fleet that had been assembled at the Korveth approach anchor for the past 3 months, waiting for the Tivari response to our ultimatum regarding the intertransit corridors. The fleet comprised 4,312 warships, not counting support and logistics platforms. It was the largest military concentration the Sovereignty had assembled since the Consolidation Wars. It was there, at the Korveth approach, because we had believed that a show of force adequate to compel Tivari compliance required, at minimum, 4,000 warships. We had not imagined needing them for anything other than diplomatic theater. The contact at Korveth 7 Deep did not appear to be interested in the Tivari. Admiral Borenves came to Korveth Station personally, which took 90 minutes, during which time I ran 17 additional scans at increasing intensity levels. I will log the relevant findings from those scans in order, because the sequence matters. Scan 3 through 6, medium-high intensity, confirmed the mass reading and began to resolve the silhouette. The hull was long, extremely long. My scan reconstruction algorithms, which have been calibrated against every known ship class in the Sovereignty's archive and most known external species designs, could not place it. The basic geometry was recognizable as a deep space hull, a spine-mounted architecture, drive systems aft, what appeared to be weapon emplacements along the dorsal and ventral surfaces, but the proportions were wrong by every metric I had on file. It was too long for its beam. The drive signatures were too cold for the mass. The weapon emplacements, if that is what they were positioned in arrays that did not match any firing doctrine I had ever analyzed. It was as though someone had looked at the general concept of a warship and then built one by different physics. I logged it and kept scanning. Scans 7 through 11, high intensity, began to return internal structure data. This is where I should note that a high-intensity resonance scan is not merely a detection tool. At sufficient intensity, it is also a weapon. Vael Sovereignty deep scan resonance at intensity levels above 0.7 standard will cause structural fatigue in most known hull materials. We have used this, in combat contexts, to shake apart lightly built hulls without firing a conventional shot. It is not our primary doctrine. We are not a warfighting civilization in the conventional sense, but it is a capability, and it is a capability we have used. The high-intensity scans at 0.73 standard return data about the hull's internal structure that my analysis systems spent 11 minutes trying to interpret. The architecture inside was layered in a way I had not encountered. There were chambers I could not categorize. There were what appeared to be emitter arrays of some kind that were not drive systems, and were not conventional weapon systems, and were not point defense arrays, and were not anything in my archive. I noted, at scan 11, that the hull appeared to be absorbing approximately 30% of my high-intensity resonance, and doing something with it that the return data did not clearly indicate. I marked this as anomalous and filed it as a priority note for the Admiral's briefing. I did not understand what it meant yet. Admiral Borenves arrived at scan 14. I gave her the summary while I was running it. She is not a technical officer. Her background is fleet coordination and strategic command, so I kept the technical language to a minimum and focused on the practical findings. Unknown hull, mass exceeding any known vessel class, no archive match, running cold, no drive activity, no communications, no response to our standard hailing frequencies, which we had been broadcasting since minute 31 of the contact. "Is it hostile?" the Admiral asked. "I don't know what it is," I said. "I don't know if it's crewed. I don't know if it's operational. I can tell you it is the largest single hull I have ever scanned, that it does not match any entry in the Sovereignty archive, and that it has not responded to 23 minutes of contact attempts." Could it be derelict? I thought about this. A derelict of that mass drifting cold through the Korveth approach, it was not impossible. There were ghost hulls in the deep void, remnants of species that had risen and collapsed over the long history of this part of the galaxy, and a few of them were very large. But derelicts drift. They follow trajectories. They do not hold position. "It is not drifting," I said. "It is stationary. Something is keeping it stationary. Whatever is doing that is not producing a thermal signature I can read, but it is there." The Admiral looked at the scan reconstruction on the main display for a long time. The image was imprecise. High-intensity resonance gives you structure, not clarity, and the hull's absorption of 30% of our signal was degrading the resolution. But even imprecise, the scale of it was visible. On the reconstruction, Korveth Station's own silhouette occupied a small corner of the frame for comparison, because I had overlaid it to give the Admiral a sense of proportion. She looked at that comparison for perhaps 15 seconds. "Full deep scan barrage," she said. "Everything Korveth Station has, plus the scan platforms from the fleet's forward array. I want to know what that hull is before I commit to any further action." I began preparing the barrage. I should describe, for any reader of this log who may not be familiar with sovereignty resonance doctrine, what a full deep scan barrage means. Korveth Station carries 47 primary scan emitters and 112 secondary emitters. The fleet's forward array at the time had an additional 319 scan platforms distributed across the approach corridor. Together, that is 478 emitter sources, all of them capable of running at maximum intensity simultaneously, all of their returns processed through a central analysis core and reconstructed into a composite image of whatever they are scanning. At maximum intensity, a coordinated barrage from that many emitters will give you hull plate level resolution on any known structure. You can read the serial numbers on a drive core casing at a range of 60,000 standard units. You can read the composition of a bulkhead down to the alloy mix. You can, if the hull is insufficiently shielded, induce catastrophic resonance fatigue in the internal structure. Not instantly, but within several minutes of sustained exposure. We had never used a full barrage against a ship this size. We had never needed to. I want to note, because this is the sort of thing that a professional log should include, that during the 22 minutes of platform deployment, I attempted twice more to reach the contact by broadcast. I used the standard sovereignty hailing protocol and 3 additional formats from our archive of external species communication standards: the Tivari Resonance Pulse Greeting, the Collective's Narrow Beam Data Burst format, and an older method used by the Rithasi before they discontinued spaceflight. I received no response to any of them. Whatever was in the hull at Korveth 7 Deep was not interested in conversation. It had not moved. It had not responded to hailing. It had not powered up its drive systems or altered its thermal output or done anything that could be read on any instrument I had available as a reaction to our presence. It was simply there. It had been there, running silent and cold and enormous, long enough that I began to wonder, for the first time, whether it had been there before we detected it, whether it had been holding position at Korveth 7 Deep for some time before the first ping caught it, before, perhaps, I had been on shift, before the previous watch had logged their contact report. I pulled the automated scan records for the 12 hours before my shift began. The contact was not logged in any of them, but the automated scan records use a low sensitivity threshold, and a hull absorbing 30% of the initial return signal at first pass would potentially fall below that threshold at low-intensity, automated survey levels. It was possible the contact had been at Korveth 7 Deep for considerably longer than 6 hours. It was possible it had been there for days. I noted this in the log. I did not share it with the Admiral because it would not have changed her decision, and because I did not want to introduce speculation into a technical briefing. I coordinated the deployment of the fleet's scan platforms into optimal triangulation positions. This took 22 minutes. During that time, the hull at Korveth 7 Deep continued to hold position and continued to produce no communications. At scan 16, I ran what I labeled in my log as a probe pulse, a brief, high-intensity single-emitter scan at maximum power, just to see whether the contact would respond. It did not move. It did not communicate. The return came back with the same anomaly I had flagged at scan 11, approximately 30% absorption, with the absorbed energy doing something the return data could not characterize. I flagged the anomaly again. I noted it for the Admiral's attention. I did not have time to investigate further because the platform deployment was completing. At the time the barrage was ready to fire, I believed we were about to learn what the hull was. I believed the composite reconstruction would give us something we could search against an expanded archive, perhaps a database of pre-sovereignty deep void structures, or a cross-reference against external species design catalogs. I believed the sustained resonance exposure, if the hull was crude, would give whatever crew was inside a strong and unambiguous message about sovereignty capability and reach, the way we had always used deep scan, as a demonstration, as a statement of technical dominance, as a way of making clear to any entity in range that we could see them completely, and that our seeing them was itself an act of overwhelming them. This is what I believed, because this is what had always been true. The Vael Sovereignty civilization is built on resonance. We learned long before recorded history that the universe can be known by touching it with waves and reading what comes back. This was, for us, the foundational discovery, not agriculture, not metallurgy, not language. Resonance first, everything else later. Our science is built on resonance analysis. Our medicine is built on resonance diagnostics. Our architecture is designed around resonance harmonics. Our military doctrine is built on the understanding that to scan is to understand, and to understand completely is to dominate. Because you cannot fight what you cannot perceive, and we perceive everything. Everything. In 51 years, I had never scanned something I could not ultimately categorize. I gave the order to fire the barrage at standard hour 6, minute 44, second 12. What happened in the next 11 seconds I will describe as precisely as I can, because it is important that whoever finds this log, if anyone finds this log, understands the sequence. At second 0, all 478 emitters fired simultaneously. The composite output was the highest resonance intensity Korveth Station had ever produced. I watched the scan energy cross the distance to the contact at Korveth 7 deep. At maximum intensity, the wavefront is visible on the tracking display as a propagating ring. I watched it reach the hull. At second 1, the contact did what it had been doing since the first ping. It absorbed a fraction of the incoming energy. But this time the fraction was different. This time, it absorbed all of it. Every emitter at maximum output and the hull at Korveth 7 deep took all of it in without returning a single coherent reflection. I remember thinking, the absorption plating on this hull is unlike anything the Sovereignty has built. At second 3, the return came, not from the hull, not from the contact. The return came back along the exact same vectors our emitters had sent the scan energy out on, came back structured, organized, transformed. It came back as data, detailed, precise, exhaustive data about us. I did not understand this immediately. What appeared on my analysis screens at second 3 was a resonance return of extraordinary resolution, and my first instinct was that the hull had somehow bounced our own scan back at us, a reflection, a mirror effect from an unusually smooth hull surface. But mirror effects are diffuse. They scatter. This return was focused. Each emitter received its own dedicated return signal, structured to carry information about the source of the emission, about the emitter's position, its power output, its physical dimensions, the composition of its housing, the thermal state of the operator station behind it. The return was not a reflection of our scan. It was a scan of us, delivered at our own emitter's exact return frequency, riding our own outgoing signal back to us along paths we had opened. Something inside the hull at Korveth 7 deep had received our full deep scan barrage, processed all 478 simultaneous inputs in approximately 2 seconds, built a complete model of everything that was scanning it, and sent that model back to us as a return. At second 5, every display on Korveth Station's operations floor updated simultaneously with the composite result. We had a perfect map of ourselves. Every scan emitter, its position, its power state, its exact coordinates in space. Every scan platform in the fleet's forward array. Every warship in the fleet, because the barrage return had apparently included data gathered at angles that swept past our own platforms and touched the hulls of the assembled fleet behind us. 4,312 warships, their positions, their hull dimensions, the locations of their own scan emitters, which, because we are a resonant civilization, are located on the exterior of every hull we build, because resonance emitters must be unobstructed to function. The hull at Korveth 7 Deep had, in the span of 5 seconds, acquired targeting data on every weapon and every ship in our assembled fleet. At second 6, I understood what the array of emitters I had flagged inside the hull's internal structure actually was. They were not scan emitters in any conventional sense. They were return beam weapons designed to receive an incoming resonance scan, invert the carrier wave, load the inverted wave with a shaped pulse of destructive energy, and fire it back along the incoming vector. Precise, automatic, instantaneous. The hull had not needed to aim at us. We had aimed at it. It had simply sent our own aim back. At second 7, the hull at Korveth 7 Deep fired. 478 coherent energy pulses departed the hull simultaneously, each one traveling the exact reverse path of the scan signal that had reached it. Each one found at the far end of its path an emitter. Our emitters, our scan platforms, the exterior sensor arrays of our warships. The emitter housing on a Sovereignty warship is hardened against impact and radiation, but it is not hardened against a focused resonance pulse delivered at the exact resonant frequency of its own construction, because designing a resonance emitter to resist its own operating frequency is physically absurd. The pulse found each housing's resonant frequency, because the return scan had mapped it exactly, and then it matched that frequency with a destructive harmonic and delivered it at a power level sufficient to induce catastrophic failure. Each pulse took approximately 0.31 seconds to travel from the hull to its target. I watched all 478 impacts occur in what appeared, on the display, to be simultaneously. A single frame of reference in which every emitter on every platform, on every warship in our assembled fleet, and on Korveth Station itself, ceased to exist at the same moment. The fleet scan platforms went first, because they were closest to the hull and the travel time was shortest. 93 seconds later, the pulses reached the warships. I know the timing because the feed from the fleet's tactical network did not go dark immediately. The pulses struck the emitter housings and propagated inward through the ship's resonance infrastructure, and some ships had enough redundancy in their internal systems to survive the initial hit for a few seconds before the propagating structural failure reached their cores. 4,312 warships. I watched 4,312 separate cascade failure events begin at approximately the same moment. Some ships went dark in seconds. Some took longer. One Tevrath-class carrier, the Resonant Covenant, which I mentioned by name because its commander was an officer I had met, a methodical woman named Adept Captain Thuris Yavinkal, who had been 2 years behind me in the Sovereignty's Resonance Academy, burned for 6 minutes before it broke apart. Most were faster. The hull at Korveth 7 Deep did not fire again during those 6 minutes. It did not need to. It had fired once, along 478 precise return vectors, and that firing had been sufficient. I am getting ahead of myself. I want to log the sequence precisely, and I have been noting the seconds but not the minutes, and I should correct that. Between second 7, when the hull fired, and minute 11, when the last of the fleet's surviving hulks stopped producing detectable thermal output, I was not simply watching. I was attempting to respond. I want to be clear about this. I am not recording the death of the Sovereignty's assembled fleet without also recording what we did in response to it. At second 8, I broadcast an emergency all-frequencies distress call to the Sovereignty's Deep Approach Relay Network. I do not know whether it reached anyone, because Korveth Station's primary communications array was located adjacent to the primary scan emitter bank, which had ceased to exist at approximately second 7. I used the backup communications relay, which operates on a different power circuit and was not destroyed in the initial firing, and I transmitted the distress call on every available channel. I do not know if it was received. At second 9, Commander Korveth Station ordered the station's point defense grid to lock onto the hull and fire. The point defense grid is not a resonance system. It uses kinetic projectiles and conventional directed energy weapons, because point defense targets are close range and fast moving, not the kind of thing a deep scan is suited for. The grid fired. The projectiles and directed energy pulses crossed the distance to Korveth 7 deep in approximately 4 seconds. I watched them impact the hull. Nothing happened. The hull did not maneuver. Its hull plating absorbed the impacts, all of them, without visible effect. I ran a rapid analysis on the point defense impact data and concluded that the hull's armor was thicker than any structure the Sovereignty had on record, and that the outer surface was composed of materials that distributed impact energy laterally across the hull's surface, rather than allowing it to penetrate. The kinetic impacts produced no detectable structural deformation. The directed energy pulses produced no detectable thermal elevation. Commander Station ordered the grid to keep firing. It did. It fired for 4 minutes and 31 seconds, until the station's power routing to the grid failed in the same cascade that took out the secondary scan bank. The hull did not respond to any of this. It held position. It did not move toward us. It did not maneuver. It had not moved at any point since we first detected it, not even during the firing of its return beam weapons. It simply existed at Korveth 7 deep, enormous and still, and when we had pointed our finest instruments at it, it had sent those instruments back through us. During those same 4 minutes, I watched the fleet die through whatever sensor feeds I still had access to. The fleet tactical network had collapsed when the warships lost their resonance relay arrays, but the optical array and a handful of passive thermal sensors on the station's undamaged sections were still feeding data to my console. What they showed me, I am going to log precisely. The ships nearest to the hull's forward arc were gone fastest, gone before my eye could track the sequence on the optical feed, before any of the passive thermal sensors had time to register a change in their heat signatures. They simply ceased to show as distinct points of light and became expanding clouds of debris. The ships at middle distance, the bulk of the fleet, arrayed in the formations that had seemed so formidable 40 minutes earlier, took between 3 and 20 seconds to fail. The cascade from emitter housing to internal resonance infrastructure to power core did not proceed at the same rate in every ship, because no two ships had exactly the same internal layout, the same age of components, the same maintenance history. Some went quickly because they were in good repair, and their resonance infrastructure was tightly coupled. Some went slowly because they were older, and their resonance infrastructure had accumulated the kind of loose connections and bypass junctions that accumulate over decades of service, and the cascade had more failures to hop across before it reached something critical. I found it difficult to maintain professional detachment while watching this. I will note that in the record, because I think it is honest, and because I think this log, if it is recovered, will be read by people who will wonder. At minute 4, one of the passive thermal sensors picked up what I believe was the Resonant Covenant, the Tevrath-class carrier I mentioned, the ship whose commander I had met. The Tevrath class is large enough that its thermal signature is distinctive on passive sensors, and the ship at that bearing was producing a thermal output consistent with a Tevrath class that has lost its primary power core, but whose secondary systems are still running. It burned for 6 minutes, not in the sense of fire. There is no fire in open space, but in the sense of cascading internal failure producing radiation across several spectrums that registers as heat on passive sensors. It burned for 6 minutes, and then its secondary systems failed, and it went cold and dark and joined the debris field. I did not know, watching it go dark, whether anyone aboard was alive at that point. I still do not know. I noted the bearing and the time in this log in case it assists anyone who reviews the engagement and wants to account for the Sovereign Covenant's personnel. The hull at Korveth 7 Deep did not fire again during those 6 minutes. It did not need to. It had fired once, along 478 precise return vectors, and that firing had been sufficient. At minute 2, Admiral Borenves attempted to reach the Sovereignty Fleet Command Network. There was no Fleet Command Network anymore. The Fleet Command Network is distributed across the hulls of the fleet's command-class warships, which run their coordination systems through resonance relay arrays mounted on their exteriors, which were among the first systems destroyed when the hull fired. She attempted manual communications on backup frequencies. She received no responses that were coherent. She received automated distress signals from ships that were still structurally intact, but had lost all command capability. She received one voice communication from an ensign aboard a frigate that had survived the initial firing because it was positioned behind a larger hull that had absorbed the pulse first, a stroke of geometry that had kept the frigate's emitters intact for perhaps 30 additional seconds before the cascade from the larger hull's destruction reached it. The ensign said in the communication, "We are intact, we are," and then the communication ended. At minute 4, I was asked by Admiral Borenves whether there was anything at all, I could do with the station's remaining operational systems to affect the hull at Korveth 7 Deep. I reviewed what we had. The primary scan bank was destroyed. The secondary scan bank was destroyed, along with the adept bay. The tertiary scan bank was operational, though at reduced power, because it was in a section of the station that drew power from a separate circuit. The tertiary bank had 9 emitters. 9 emitters, at reduced power, against a hull that had processed the simultaneous output of 478 emitters at full intensity in less than 2 seconds. "No," I said. "Nothing at all. If I fire the tertiary bank at that hull," I said, "it will read the 9 return vectors and send 9 pulses back along them, and we will lose the tertiary bank and possibly the section of the station it is located in. I cannot affect it. I cannot scan it without it using the scan against us. And without a scan, I cannot tell you what it is doing or why." The Admiral looked at me for a moment and then looked back at the main display, which was now showing, in place of the fleet status readout, which had collapsed when the Fleet Command Network went down, a simple visual feed from the station's optical array. The hull at Korveth 7 Deep was visible on the optical feed. It had turned on its running lights at some point in the last several minutes. I do not know exactly when this happened because I was focused on other readouts, but when I looked at the optical feed, the hull was lit. Not brightly, a series of low-intensity lights along the spine and along the edges of the weapon emitter arrays, the kind of lighting that any spacefaring species would recognize as the lights of a vessel in motion. It was not in motion. It was still at Korveth 7 Deep, but it had lit its running lights, and in context, with 4,312 wrecks cooling in the space between it and us, the lights read like something. I am not going to characterize what they read like in this log, because characterizing the intent of a foreign vessel based on its running lights is not within my professional remit, and I am trying to keep this account professional. I will simply note that the running lights were lit, and that I noticed them at approximately minute 5. At minute 6, Korveth Station registered an internal structural alert from the habitat ring. A cascade failure in the station's resonance infrastructure, the same infrastructure that had run from every scan emitter on the station's exterior, inward through the station's hull to the power systems that fed everything else, had been propagating since minute 0, and it had reached the habitat ring's load-bearing frame. The station's structural integrity systems attempted to isolate the failure. They succeeded in slowing it. They did not stop it. Commander Ashendal began evacuation procedures for the habitat ring. The station had 314 personnel. I do not know how many of them reached the emergency evacuation pods, because I lost the internal network status at minute 8, when the power circuit feeding my console underwent a partial failure, and I switched to the emergency battery bank, which kept the console running at reduced capability. On the emergency battery bank, I can operate the tertiary scan bank at 15% of its reduced power capacity. I chose not to. I can operate the optical array. I am using it. I can operate this log buffer. I am using it. At minute 9, I watched the hull at Korveth 7 Deep move for the first time. It did not accelerate the way a Sovereignty vessel accelerates. The gradual power-up, the drive signature building from thermal silence to a registered output curve. The hull at Korveth 7 Deep went from stationary to moving in a period I would estimate, based on the optical feed's frame rate, at less than 1 second. Not full velocity in 1 second. I do not want to overstate it, but a distinct and sudden change from holding position to forward motion, with no apparent transition. The drive systems, whatever they were, did not produce the thermal bloom that any Sovereignty vessel of comparable mass would produce. They produced almost nothing on thermal. The hull simply moved, heavy and deliberate, in a direction that was not toward Korveth Station. Toward the inner approach. Toward Sovereignty space. I want to be precise about what I understood at minute 9. Sitting at a console running on emergency battery with most of the station dead around me, and 4,312 wrecks between me and the approaching darkness where the fleet had been. The hull had not come here for us. Korveth Station was not its target. The assembled fleet at the Korveth approach was not its target. We had been in its path, and we had scanned it, and it had responded to being scanned the way it had been built to respond, automatically, precisely, without malice and without hesitation. And now it was done with us, and it was moving toward whatever it had come here for. It had not come here for us. I have spent the last 2 minutes of this log sitting with that sentence, because I am not certain I have the capacity to process it in the time I have left. A hull of that size, built to that specification, moving through the Korveth approach at this particular moment in the Sovereignty's history. There are reasons for a thing to be where it is. There are reasons a hull designed specifically to use deep scan resonance against itself would be moving through a corridor where the Sovereignty's most sophisticated scan emitter network happened to be positioned. I do not know enough. I did not scan enough. I fired a full deep scan barrage and learned, in 5 seconds, everything the hull wanted me to learn about what we had done wrong, and nothing at all about what it was or where it was going or what it intended when it got there. I am going to attempt one thing before this log closes. The tertiary scan bank has 9 emitters at 15% of reduced capacity. That is approximately 4% of the total output of the system I used in the barrage. At that power level, the hull will read the return vectors and it will fire 9 pulses back along them, and the tertiary bank will be destroyed. Possibly this section of the station will be destroyed along with it. Possibly I will be destroyed along with it. But at 15% of reduced capacity, the scan will not penetrate the hull. It will read the exterior surface only, the outer plating, the running light housings, the exterior of the return beam emitter arrays. It will not reach the internal systems. It will not give the hull's response system anything to read about our internal architecture, because at that power level, the scan cannot penetrate far enough to gather that data. The return pulses, when they come back, will carry only what the hull's exterior emits, which is almost nothing. They will arrive at my 9 emitters and do approximately what a low-powered pulse can do, which is damage the emitters and possibly cascade into the nearby power systems. They will not tell the hull anything it doesn't already know from the barrage. I know this theory is sound. I have been an adept for 51 years. I also know the hull is moving away from Korveth Station at a rate that places it, at this moment, at a range of approximately 9,000 standard units. 9,000 units is at the edge of the tertiary bank's effective range at 15% of reduced capacity. I have perhaps 3 minutes before the hull moves beyond that range, and the question becomes academic. I am going to fire the scan. What I want to know, what I need to know, before this log closes, as a professional matter, as the only thing I can still do in this context that has any value is what the hull looks like at the exterior, what its silhouette is, what I missed in the 6 hours between the first ping and the barrage, what the shape of it is without the reconstruction artifacts and the absorption interference that corrupted every return during the main engagement. I want to see it clearly. I have always wanted to see things clearly. Scan initiated. 15% tertiary output, single sweep, optical coherence assist. Range, 9,227 standard units. Return received. Processing. What the exterior scan of the hull at Korveth 7 Deep shows me, in the 11 seconds before the tertiary bank fails and takes the emergency power bus with it, is this. The hull is longer than I estimated. It is 1.4 times my highest mass estimate and approximately double my length estimate, which means my reconstruction during the main engagement was understating its scale, because the absorption of 30% of our signal was masking the outer edges of the hull. The real hull extends beyond what I thought were its boundaries. I was looking at a fraction of it and calling it the whole. The silhouette, now that I have a clean exterior return, is not random. It is not the vaguely elongated architecture I characterized in my earlier logs. It has a deliberate geometry, a long spine, deep and heavy at the aft end where the drive systems are mounted, tapering toward the fore end in a profile that any spacefaring species would recognize as the deliberate lines of something built to move through resistance. The weapon emitter arrays along the dorsal and ventral surfaces are not scattered. They are arranged in a pattern, and the pattern has a logic I can read even in 11 seconds of clean data. Overlapping fields of fire, distributed so that no approach vector to the hull is without coverage, so that a weapon fired from any angle will be answered by return fire from at least 3 emitters that have a clear line to the source. The running lights are on its hull markings. I can see them now clearly at this range. A series of characters along the spine, large enough to be legible from the outside at close range, in a writing system I do not recognize but can photograph with the optical assist and log for later analysis. Below the characters I do not recognize, in smaller script along the upper spine, there is a second set of markings. These I can read. The Sovereignty's archive contains the writing systems of every species we have encountered in 2,000 years of recorded history, and this script is in the archive. I know it. I have scanned documents in it. I have read communications in it. It is the script used by the civilization designated in our archive as the Terran Confederacy. I have time for one additional note before the tertiary bank fails. The Terran Confederacy is listed in the Sovereignty Archive as a developing civilization, pre-expansionist, no military capability assessed, no deep void presence recorded. The archive entry for the Terran Confederacy was last updated by a survey mission conducted. I am reading this from a subindex I still have access to in the emergency buffer, 217 years ago. The archive notes at the bottom of the entry in the standardized confidence assessment field that every archive entry includes no threat to sovereignty interests, no further monitoring recommended. 217 years ago. The characters I cannot read, the larger ones, the ones at the top of the hull marking, above the Terran script, I now believe are an inventory designation, a ship name or registry number in the Terran Confederacy's own language. The smaller characters beneath, the ones I can read, are the designation in an older script, possibly maintained for historical or formal purposes. I can read those, and they say, in the translation my archive gives me for formal Terran military nomenclature, approximately, Imperial Warship, Sovereign Class, Hull Number 7, and then a name. The name in the Terran script I can read is 2 words. The first word means unbroken. The second word means meridian. The tertiary bank is failing. The log buffer will hold for a few additional minutes on its own internal power cell, But I am losing the external feeds now. The optical array is dark. The tracking display is dark. I am in emergency lighting, which is red, and I am speaking into a buffer I can no longer see the status indicators for. What I want to say, in the time remaining, is this. The Sovereignty Archive has an entry for the Terran Confederacy. That entry was assessed 217 years ago by a survey adept who did a long-range scan of the Terran home system, cataloged the civilization, assigned it a threat rating of effectively 0, and recommended no further monitoring. The archive has not been updated since. In 217 years, no sovereignty adept has scanned the Terran Confederacy's home system again. We did not believe it was necessary. We had seen what they were and we had cataloged them, and we had moved on. In the 51 years of my career, I have updated hundreds of archive entries. I have corrected survey data that was outdated by a decade, by 2 decades, by 50 years. I have argued, in formal submissions to the Archive Authority, that regular resurvey of even apparently stable civilizations is essential because 2 decades is enough time for a civilization to change in ways that are relevant to our interests. I have never been wrong about this. I have never submitted a resurvey that found nothing new. Something always changes. 217 years. What the IWS Unbroken Meridian was built to do, receive a resonance scan, map every emitter that produced it, fire a return pulse along each of those vectors at a frequency calibrated to destroy the emitting hardware, is not something a civilization builds as an afterthought. It is a doctrine. It is a weapon philosophy. A decision made by people who understood that the primary military tool of the Vael Sovereignty is deep scan resonance, who designed a ship to answer that tool by turning it against us, and who then built that ship and crewed it and sent it through the Korveth approach in the direction of sovereignty interior space. Someone in the Terran Confederacy learned what the sovereignty does to things it scans. Someone built a ship that could not be scanned without cost. Someone waited 217 years for us to stop watching. I have been a resonance adept for 51 years. I have always believed that to see clearly was to be safe, that if you could scan something completely, you understood it, and if you understood it, you had advantage over it. This was the first principle of everything the sovereignty built, everything we are. We saw things clearly. We cataloged them. We moved on. We did not look again because what was the point of looking again at something you had already seen? I understand now what we missed. When I said earlier in this log that the Vael Sovereignty civilization is built on resonance, I said that as a matter of pride. It is the thing I would have said to any external species as our defining achievement, our founding capability, the root of our science and our dominance. We touch the universe and the universe tells us what it is. We see everything. We catalog everything. We do not leave things uncatalogued. It is, or was, our greatest strength. What I understand now, in the 11 seconds of this last scan before the buffer fails, is that our greatest strength has a mirror image. The same capability that lets us see everything clearly, the outward-reaching resonance wave, the precise return, the analysis of what the universe reflects back, can be inverted, can be used against us, can be made into a weapon by anyone patient enough to understand it and skilled enough to engineer the counter. We built an entire military doctrine on the assumption that to scan is to dominate. We never considered that something might wait 217 years for us to use that doctrine on it. We scanned them once. We should not have stopped. The log buffer's internal cell is declining. I have perhaps 4 minutes of recording time remaining, possibly less. I am going to spend it logging the technical data from the exterior scan in as much detail as I can manage, because the technical data is what matters, and it is more useful to whoever finds this than anything else I might say. Hull dimensions, silhouette geometry, emitter array configuration, surface material composition estimates from the scan return, the character strings from the hull markings. If the emergency buffer survives, if it is recovered, The technical data will tell the next adept, the next survey mission, the next archive authority review what they are looking at. Though by the time anyone finds this buffer, I suspect the Sovereignty will already know. I suspect the Sovereignty is learning right now, in whatever systems the IWS Unbroken Meridian is moving toward, in whatever way the Sovereignty learns things it should have known 217 years ago. I suspect that what is happening to us at Korveth Station, what happened to 4,312 warships in 11 minutes, is not a beginning. It is a reply to something we did 217 years ago in a long-range scan of a system we classified as harmless and did not look at again. A reply we spent 217 years composing, apparently. That is the last personal notation I will make. Technical data to follow. Hull exterior dimensions, confirmed length, 14.7 kilometers. Confirmed beam, 1.9 kilometers. Confirmed draft, 2.2 kilometers. Mass estimate revised upward to 640,000 standard units. Surface material composition. Layered alloy construction with an outer stratum I cannot identify from this scan quality, an intermediate stratum consistent with high-density armor plate, and an inner stratum consistent with resonance-absorbent composite. The outer stratum is what ate our scan signal. I do not have a Sovereignty equivalent. I want to note, for the record, what 14.7 kilometers means in terms I can actually convey. The largest structure the Sovereignty has ever placed in space is the consolidation gate at Vael Prime, the primary transit node for the inner systems, a structure we spent 60 years building that required the continuous labor of 11,000 workers and the material output of 3 dedicated mining operations. The consolidation gate at Vael Prime is 12.3 kilometers at its longest axis. This ship is larger, a single ship built by a civilization we classified as pre-expansionist, a civilization we have not looked at in 217 years. Drive system exterior, 6 primary exhaust ports aft, each approximately 200 meters in diameter, plus a distributed secondary drive system along the ventral spine that I did not identify in the main engagement because it was not active. It is active now. The thermal output from the secondary drive system, even at this range and with failing equipment, is substantially higher than my equipment can accurately measure. The hull is accelerating. I cannot determine its heading with precision, but the vector is consistent with the deep approach corridor toward the inner transit zone. Emitter array configuration. Confirmed 112 exterior apertures on the dorsal surface, arranged in staggered rows of 14. Confirmed 109 exterior apertures on the ventral surface, confirmed 67 apertures on the port beam, 67 on the starboard beam, 31 on the fore surface. Total exterior aperture count, approximately 386. These are the return beam weapon emitters. This is the system that fired on us. 386 emitters. We fed it data on 478 of our own. I want to note the mathematics of that, because the mathematics matter, and because I am an adept and the mathematics are what I have. We had 478 emitter sources. The hull had 386 return beam emitters. We outnumbered its weapon systems by 92. We aimed 478 weapons at it, and it had only 386 to fire back. By every standard doctrine of the Sovereignty, that ratio, 478 to 386, means the hull was outmatched. By the standard doctrine, we were the overwhelming force in this engagement. The mathematics of emitter counts said we had the advantage. Except that we did not fire our weapons at it, we scanned it. And by giving it our scan vectors, we handed it 478 targeting solutions, each one precise, each one backlighted by the full power output of our own emitters at the source end. The hull fired 386 times and hit 478 targets. It hit 92 targets with a single pulse each that covered 2 emitters, fired at angles that placed 2 emitters in a single return beam path. I did not realize this until the exterior scan data processed. 386 pulses, 478 hits. The hull's targeting solution was not simply accurate. It was optimized in the span of 2 seconds for maximum efficiency. Running light configuration. Consistent with Terran military operational status, all lights indicate full operational capability, which in Terran convention means all primary systems functioning. Vessel at combat readiness. No damage reported. The ship is undamaged. We caused no damage. The point defense grid fired on it for 4 minutes and 31 seconds and caused no damage detectable from a scan at 9,000 standard units. Hull marking character strings, logged phonetically for the archive record, in both the unidentified upper script and the Terran lower script. The Terran lower script, fully transliterated, Imperial Warship, Unbroken Meridian, Sovereign Class Deep Void, Hull Registry 7 of the Terran Confederacies. The buffer's internal cell is at terminal status. I have perhaps 30 additional seconds. I want to close this log correctly. I have filed several thousand logs in 51 years of service, and I have always closed them correctly with the standard adept's notation: date, time, adept name, rank, station, status. I am going to do that now. Standard hour 6 minute 58 second. I do not have the second. The clock feed is dark. Senior Resonance Adept Theth Oron Seva, First Class. Korveth Station, Vael Sovereignty Deep Approach Watch. Status: Station non-operational. Fleet status: non-operational. Personnel status: unknown. Contact status: the IWS Unbroken Meridian is at bearing deep approach inbound, accelerating, all systems operational, heading unknown, hull undamaged. We did not look at them again. We should have looked. End of log.